Okay, we're back to work, back to work. Erica, do you want to give us an update on Oregon?
Yes, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Good afternoon. My name is Erica Dinsdale. I am the Chief Innovation Officer for the Oregon Department of Transportation. And today I'm going to chat with you about things that Oregon has been doing in road usage charge. So lessons we've been learning, things were our hopes and dreams, where we're going, all that good stuff. Do I have a clicker? Let me. Clicker. You're fine. You're fine. So just as Oregon was the first state to pass a gas tax back in 1919, which was eventually adopted by many other states and also the federal government, we've been pioneering road usage charging, and now the nation is starting to pay attention as well. So it's been a long, windy road, and we've been working on this for a long time. Back in 2001, our legislature established the Road User Fee Task Force. This is a group of about 12 people who are appointed in some very complicated ways between the governor's office and the House and Senate. And includes both legislators, state house members, as well as private sector folks, such as AAA has been a very strong member for us on this Road User Fee Task Force. And they were really tasked with finding a way for another alternative transportation system or model, given the decline of the gas tax. So since then, we have done 2 pilots, and then now we have a fully operational system. It is still volunteer-based, and that launched in July 1st of 2015, first in the nation. This one is really different than some of the earlier pilots because it really includes a production system, it's end-to-end processes for account manager oversight, volunteer coordination, compliance, and public education. But we've learned a lot, and we continue to learn. You know, you would think that once we have over 1,500 vehicles who have since July 1st of 2015 participated in our system, paying real money to the real coffers of the state of Oregon, that we would maybe know all that there is to know, but I can just tell you we continue to learn about this. But some just kind of top line observations that are things we keep near and dear to us is that we have to be able to support all types of vehicles. So sometimes that means having non-technology options, a lot of what we've already talked about today. I think we've talked about today non-technology options in terms of citizen choice, but we also, quite frankly, need non-technology options because there are different types of vehicles that all of a sudden don't work with whatever technology we're doing. Either in our current case, the OBD2 port, there's some problem with how the thing plugs in. Maybe it's some custom vehicle, a bunch of different reasons. Enforcement really can drive cost, and so figuring out a way to do enforcement in a way that complements the overall rut collection system instead of brings it down is something that has been and will continue to be very important. Technology neutral, so we've been very careful to instead of require a specific type of technology, to require a certain standards of the way the data is transmitted and the way that the thing is certified. That helps our private sector account managers continue to innovate, as well as as the auto manufacturers innovate, right? Be able to, through time, not be stuck with a particular technology in statute. Public-private partnerships are really the essence of the RUC model for us in Oregon. We are developing these private sector vendors is extremely important to us. They're the ones that are bringing value-added services. They're the ones that are managing most of the customer relationship, and having that be a very strong and positive relationship is very important to us. As an example, we meet with them every Wednesday. Every single Wednesday, we have phone calls with our account managers, making sure that our relationship with them is healthy, that we're proactively addressing issues that we may have, because without that, the whole system is a lot harder to manage. Choices. Choices, we have found, is really our cornerstone motto of just about everything that we do with RUC. So that the citizen has choice of account manager, the citizen has choice of way to pay, the citizen has choice of technology or not, GPS or not, and that all of that drives a better overall experience. The thing that was surprising to me as I was coming in a couple of years ago to this role and learning more about RUC is how much the citizen or the people participating feel more comfortable with RUC once they participate in it. And I think I've heard many of you have been participating in your own state's RUC pilots, and maybe you've gone through the same journey as well. It could be because in some cases there's value-added services that are provided, and that makes folks feel better about it. But often, and we've done this time and time again with third-party surveys, with focus groups, what we hear back is that at the end of participating in some sort of program, in the RUC program, people feel like it's a fairer way to pay. Fairer than the gas tax, that it's for their use of the road when they're using it. And so because of that, we, of course, even though we're in what you could call a static operation right now of a volunteer program, try to continue to get others to participate even for a short period of time, right? How does that work for them? So one of our goals also is to increase the public's understanding of transportation funding and RUC's role in it. I think most of you will agree that the public in general struggles to understand a lot of how government is funded, and transportation isn't unique in that. And so as we have been going on our own journey, we've been thinking about this a lot and figuring out how do we tell our story? How do we have the right kinds of examples, messaging, and things that connect to a citizen where they are, right? That helps tell the story about why RUC is important. This year we conducted in-depth research and message testing so that we can create better educational tools, and we're getting ready to have some conversations around the state to help people understand why they need RUC. Just like many of your states, we have densely populated urban area and then a lot of rural area, and ideas and attitudes are very different. And so how can we connect with all of the population of our state about having a sustainable transportation funding source as well as RUC as a component of that? But a few observations we've had on the public education side. You know, we've been doing these focus groups and surveys since 2006, and we've noticed some trends. More and more Oregonians are agreeing that RUC is a fair way to fund transportation improvements, and more people are being exposed to the concept as we go along. Privacy has decreased as a major drawback to RUC. I think if all of us think back many years to our early experience with RUC and the horror that somebody might know where we were, right? It's likely that because we carry a cell phone in our pocket all the time, that our own connection with privacy and our connection with GPS and those concepts are changing in our just regular life, which is having an impact on how people think about that for RUC. We also think that because people have a choice, they can choose a non-GPS option or they can choose a GPS option, that when they choose that GPS option, because they have been enrolled and had some decision-making power there, that they are much more accepting of what they may or may not perceive as the privacy concerns. We did, through RUC West, which is a consortium of 14 Western states, we did some public opinion research trying to understand more about how individuals think about privacy. And one of the things that was fascinating to me is that when you really ask these focus groups about privacy, they all said privacy was very important to them. But when you did some testing about in what case would you perhaps be okay with, let's say, a GPS option, right? They were quick to give it up. They would give it up for the equivalent of Fred Meyer reward points, which wouldn't actually ever get them anything. They would give it up for a badge in the app that said they were the leader of something or other. They would give it up for points that have no monetary value, no specific use to them personally, but they would be so fast to trade that in. So it's fascinating as we think about and we listen to those that we engage with around privacy and make sure that we are doing all that we can to truly protect the privacy of our citizens and hold that dear and know that we as humans are a bit fickle on this topic. The other key message we have been learning is that messages around fuel-efficient vehicles not paying their fair share is fairly convincing. EV owners in Oregon generally support RUC as a funding alternative. In fact, we have a bunch enrolled in our program, voluntarily paying their own real money, even though they will also pay more themselves. But there is a delicate balance to achieve in not blaming these high MPG vehicle drivers for their positive choice while we are talking about fuel efficiency hurting funding. That's a delicate message that I think we're all still working on. So with many programs, there's challenges. I will say we have been very lucky to be able to access the FAST Act grant process to be able to fund a number of improvement items. I know some of your states are using that also for your pilots. But we have been using this FAST Act funding to look at several things, such as this public perception and acceptance, validating data accuracy, enforcement, how we can keep costs down, all of those things. So we've been doing a lot of work on that in the last couple of years. So as we prepare for a potential mandate, we have been doing a series of projects to adjust these challenges, and we're going to touch on several of them. But first, just a state of our program. These are the top 3 vehicle types that are enrolled in our volunteer program, and I know I keep saying it, but people are voluntarily paying their own money. They don't get a gift card, there's no cash back, there's not even Fred Meyer rewards points. It's just they are signing up to pay their own real money. And the 3 most enrolled vehicle types are a Prius, an F-150, and a Subaru Outback, or as I lovingly say, the State Car of Oregon. So really a wide range of types of vehicles, and in fact our enrollees are pretty evenly split, a third into that lower MPG category, that mid to average, I don't know if average is an MPG, but anyway, category, and then the high efficiency ones. So we've had 1,530 vehicles that have been enrolled to date, and we currently have about 700. So it's common. We've been able to fully test when a vehicle owner dies, when somebody totals their vehicle, when a vehicle moves out of state, all these different reasons that when we buy a new one, right, in our normal life, that vehicles change over, and we've been able to follow that through. In 2016, we received the first of our FAST Act grants in Oregon, and that helped us really look at a number of things, including looking at compliance, looking at interoperability. What was really exciting is at the same time, RUC West, which is this consortium of 14 states, also received a FAST Act grant and did all of the early work. Common concept of operations is kind of the technical term, but the requirements gathering for an interoperable RUC system in the western states. So all 14 states participated in some way there in preparation for a live demonstration. Oregon this year, with the passage of House Bill 2017, which Chair Boehne mentioned earlier, had a provision in it that allowed fully electric vehicles to, if they were opt-in to Origo, not need to pay their new enhanced registration fee, which is a substantial amount. And so this has been, I would say, our first real step to a mandatory program. I kind of lovingly call it a quasi-mandatory program because they still have a choice, right? They can choose to pay an enhanced registration fee, or they can choose to be in Origo. And we currently have our task force considering expanding this to other vehicles as well. As we look towards the future, this is really an exciting time. As I look at it, I see us connecting RUC as a platform to other things that we're trying to do, be it interoperability between states, connection to automated vehicles, tolling, a whole lot of different elements that are coming together at once. One we're focused on right now is interoperability. So as we just heard from Washington, Washington's pilot has been going on for a little while now. I am an active member and trying to pay you all the money I can driving to Seattle. But that's been a great first step in an interoperable system. Next, we have a live demonstration with California, and this is something we're super, super excited about. In your packet, there might be a handout that looks kind of like this. That has it's just a little bit of an overview of that project. This project is sponsored through Rec West. So again, our 14-state consortium, many of whom have kicked in some money in some way or another to be able to make this project possible. So in this case, we are having people drive, or they maybe are already planning to drive between Oregon and California, and be able to adequately apply the right rec rate in each state and credit the correct fuels tax rate also in each state, and then model a clearinghouse for how all those funds would actually flow back through all the complicated financial rules. Because I will tell you, there are a lot of complicated financial rules, and each state seems to have their own complicated financial rules. So this is a really exciting project. It should go live next spring. And we're all really excited about how that will go. The thing for me that makes this different is that the 14-state Rec West Consortium is all participating in one way or another, even if they're not sending their own vehicles. They have been there from the design of the requirements with the eye towards continuing to add more states to it as they are ready. In Oregon, another thing we're working on, this was another grant that we got recently, our 2017 FAST Act grant, is RUC as a funding option for local governments. In this one, we have 3 separate pilots, and we're doing what we're calling a technical test to test the technology and make sure we can correctly create bills that make sense to the citizen. So that should policymakers wish to allow it, local governments could have a way to create a local RUC rate of some sort, be it variable, be it static, be it by jurisdiction, be it by political boundary. And then the third test is an interesting one, and it's highly a technical test to make sure that the GPS drift stuff works. But what it does is it recognizes that the interstate system is about moving goods and people and not about getting to the grocery store necessarily. And so the technical test here will be charging them no money if they're less than, I believe, 5 miles on the freeway network in the Portland area. And if they are sorry, did I just say this backwards? If they're more than 5 miles on the freeway network, then it's free. If it's less than 5 miles, then there would be some RUC surcharge applied to that. So it's very much not a behavioral-based test. It's a technical test to make sure that the equipment, et cetera, can do that in preparation for should policymakers want some options on how to fund different improvements. This test is also going live next year. Our Road User Fee Task Force meets several times a year, and at their last meeting in early June, they voted to move forward a set of recommendations for the 2019 legislative session. They've chosen a strategy that the first session in 2019 is about expanding the volunteer program. And then in a future session, we'll see when they decide to do that, would be moving perhaps towards a mandatory bill. I will say that in the 2017 session, the same group put a bill in that would have created a mandatory RUC system for all vehicles 20 mpg and higher, model year 2025 and newer. So it would have gone into effect in 2025 or 2026. We were also in big negotiations for the House Bill 2017. And so obviously the RUC bill didn't pass, but they're back at it now with some good practical steps to expand the volunteer program. A couple highlights: it would be expanding the ability for vehicles beyond EVs to opt into Origo in lieu of paying their enhanced registration fees. It would also establish what I'm calling a floor so that the vehicles less than 20 mpg wouldn't be able to enroll in the volunteer RUC program, recognizing that the gas tax is a very efficient way to collect revenue for lower mpg vehicles. Doing some enforcement, so let's say you are enrolled in Origo in lieu of paying your registration fee, now you actually need to stay enrolled in Origo and not just stop. And then the one that I'm excited about is trying to figure out how to enroll in a RUC at point of sale. If any of you has have bought a vehicle in the last couple of years, and you know the huge stack of paperwork you have to go through, thinking about also including RUC in that is overwhelming and daunting. So how do we work proactively with our dealers to find a way that makes some sense, is all important work that we are working on. So other things that we're thinking about is tolling. So the picture that you see is a potential kind of schematic that shows a potential system being tolled. Gantries you're familiar with, things that collect data from the vehicle. And then maybe there's some other private sector account managers who are collecting. And if you're enrolled with them, you wouldn't need a toll tag, and you could be paying your toll through that account, be it roadside assistance, be it insurance, be it all kinds of different things. And so Oregon is really coming into tolling as a prime time and a really interesting time, where how citizens are wanting to interact with government, how technology is available. Together, those two things are ending up in a way that when we talk with other toll authorities and we hear what their challenges are, we think we might have an opportunity to not repeat some of that history. So we are really looking at an option of, could we get to a place, should tolling be implemented in the Portland area, where those who are enrolled in Origo, our RUC system, could choose to pay their tolls through that instead of a separate toll account. So that's the kind of technology systems that we are continuing to investigate, and our own commission is going to be helping provide us some direction on that by the end of the year. Another area that we're paying a lot of attention to is connection to automated vehicles. This is no news to any of you, right? But automated vehicles are likely to be electric. As we know, that makes it a challenge for funding our transportation system, as is today. In addition, there's a potential for, depending on how automated vehicle deployment happens, there's a potential for having either a lot more vehicles or a lot more congestion, as there's potentially zero occupancy vehicles or ones that are making a lot more trips during the day. And so as we think about developing our RUC system, we're also looking for ways to make sure that as automated vehicles are deployed, how can we do that with a sustainable transportation revenue system? And so we're actively, with the help of RUC West, looking at different systems for potentially, what would it be if an automated vehicles were on a RUC? How would that look like? Do we have the information we need? Is that possible? Is it feasible? What are the implications so policymakers have the information they need to make those kinds of decisions? So Oregon is working really hard to develop road usage charging. We've been working at it for a long time, and we have a lot of really exciting things that we're continuing to do as a viable path for sustainable transportation funding solution. So we're excited for what's to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica, and we'll hold our questions. So next up, we're going to hear from Commissioner Medapper, I believe. And we're trained to say road charge in California. We're not allowed to say RUC.
Yeah,
so.
we cut out ruck. We're rhymed with too many other bad words, so we call it road charge. Anywho, thank you very much, and it is great to be able to kind of follow both Washington and Oregon with their presentation, because really the three states have really worked together, and to have Senator Sonnier, now Congressman Sonnier, here today, who has really took the Oregon model and morphed it into Senate Bill 1077, which was signed by Governor Brown in 2014. And is Eric still here? Eric Bronson? I think he snuck out. He stepped out for a second. So Mark didn't even recognize Eric, who was his committee consultant, because he has a beard now, and he didn't have a beard before. Otherwise, he would have recognized him. But Eric, who now works for the chair of the Assembly Transportation Committee, was the consultant that helped in putting the bill together. So it's been great to see this come together. So I'll go through a few slides as well. Legislation, as I mentioned, mandated the road charge pilot in California. The Road Charge Technical Advisory Committee informed the pilot design. The California State Transportation Agency was placed in charge, and California provided technical support. The pilot got started. It was supposed to happen by January of 2017. It was accelerated to July of 2016. CalSTAH put together a report, which is in our packets here. If you haven't had a chance to see it, it's very comprehensive, and it is what it looks like. So it's in everybody's folder, which I encourage you when you get a chance to take a look at it. It really highlights a lot of the detail and the work. Now the California Transportation Commission is to report its final recommendations to the legislature by December of this year. And all of these things were done purposefully in a sequence. So as we look at the next slide, this kind of shows you who was on our 15-member TAC, which continues to meet. In fact, I think we're meeting in a couple of weeks, if I'm not mistaken, in Los Angeles. So like Oregon and Washington, our technical committees continue to work together. I have served as chair since its inception, and it serves as the only statutorily created body that really represents a wide range of stakeholders in road charge issues. And its role is to create a public process so we can have input from the public. You know, with legislative bodies, a lot of times we don't see the public input. This has been an area where we've been able to very carefully evaluate alternatives to the traditional fuel tax. So the TAC made recommendations on the design of the pilot to the California State Transportation Agency, to Caltrans, and that's how we move forward. And even after the pilot was concluded last year, the Road Charge TAC continues to meet, as I mentioned, to further develop recommendations to the Commission, as the Commission is charged with advising the legislature in California. And so in this legislative session, you should all know that Senator Jim Bell, who chairs the Senate Transportation Committee here in California, introduced Senate Bill 1328, which is designed to extend the TAC from its current expiration of January 2019 to January of 2023, so we can continue our studying efforts. So kind of give you a little bit of a walkthrough. This is what we did in California. We had a live demonstration that ran over 9 months. More than 5,000 vehicles participated in the live pilot. Many of the folks, like Lucy mentioned in this room, was a participant. We reported over 37.2 million miles during the California pilot, which was unprecedented. We represented multiple mileage reporting methods, which I'll show you on the slides. And for the first time, we had a mix of both light-duty as well as heavy-duty freight trucks, which was very important for us. We also included out-of-state vehicles in the pilot, and without a doubt, the largest road charge pilot in the nation to date. And as I mentioned, there's some brochures here for you to look through. So kind of sharing with you some of the slides. We had a regular website. We did a DMV insert, which went out to close to 2 million folks in DMV mailers, ongoing newsletters, and we did a good job really promoting it to get as many people as possible to sign up. We all know this chart. This is the reality that we're facing. You heard it from the congressman earlier today. But as fuel efficiency continues to increase, revenues are going to continue to drop, even with Senate Bill 1 and the other measures. There's Mr. Thron's. Eric, wave, because I wanted everybody to see the guy who was Mark DeSaulnier's committee consultant when we created 1077. Again, here's another slide that shows less gas, more miles, and this is what's happening. VMT continues to go up while gas consumption drops. And considering the fact that we have a system that's tied to the number of gallons you consume, it is financially unsustainable. And this is probably the best set of charts to show that. This is the average fuel economy in 1975. Ranged about 60%, got between 10 and 15 miles to the gallon. We fast forward 20 years, you could see that chart moved appreciably to the right. Fast forward almost another 20 years and it continued to go to the right. So with this kind of activity, there is no way that our gas tax model over the next 30 years is going to be fiscally sustainable. It's a failure, and that's why the road charge or another form of funding our transportation system is critically important. We're bolted onto a system that was created by Oregon in, 1918, I believe. California started it in 1922, and here we are in 2018, about to be 2019, and almost 100 years later, we've got to do something different. That's what this is really all about. Again, another chart shows taxable gas in billions of gallons, and it just shows, the graphs show it. It's fiscally unsustainable to continue to do what we're doing today. So here's, of course, why California was looking at it. We realized this, aging infrastructure. We heard the sad news of what happened in Italy overnight with a bridge that was built in the 60s collapsed due to poor construction and or maintenance or whatever else they're coming along. Shrinking funding, we've talked about that, from inflation to the issues of the gas tax no longer working. We all know there's new environmental requirements, from stormwater issues to you name it. These make our roads cost more. And then, of course, the old issue that fuel efficiency, or people like myself who've been driving an electric car now for 5 years, I don't pay anything into the system. And Lucy and Fran harangue me about it all the time, so they want me to pay up. So that's why I supported SB1. This is what we did in California. As I mentioned, 5,000 vehicles. We used a system, and again, we learned a lot. And I will just say up front, what we did in our pilot, especially from an accounting standpoint, I don't think we would ever recommend to do going forward. But we learned a lot, and that's the whole idea from these pilots. We used 4 account managers, which were independent to the government. They gathered mileage data. They simulated payments. We used 6 reporting methods. We had no technology, like you heard the congressman talk about. Take a picture of your odometer, to high-tech onboard telematics within the vehicle that took data from a Tesla, for example, and took that data on the miles driven, and that is how the mileage was reported, to the simple things like a plug-in GPS under the dash. As I mentioned, heavy commercial vehicles, you can see the total miles driven in the pilot. This is an interesting breakdown of the number of types of vehicles. 87% were private vehicles. Heavy commercial vehicles was about 1%. The interesting stat is, of that 1%, they drove over 10% of the miles, just to demonstrate how important freight is and how important goods movement is in our states, especially when it comes to how we account for paying for it. But this kind of shows you the breakup of the various folks, where they came from. These are the important issues that Senate Bill 1077 mandated us to include statutorily. And I believe we've done a really good job, especially in the privacy and data security areas. We were very sensitive from day one to privacy. If there's somebody, and that was the beauty of our committee. We have the leading privacy rights advocates in the state of California serve on the Technical Advisory Committee. These are important voices for us to listen to when we recommend future suggestions. But you can see here, income equity, administration costs, that is probably by far the biggest issue. The gas tax hardly cost anything to collect. This is very expensive, the way we pilot it. Our goal is to figure out a way to make it just as cost effective as the gas tax is to collect today. These are some of the findings that we had in here. I think out of the people that we surveyed that participated, the third bullet, most think the road charge model is much more equitable. Today it's unfair. If you drive a F-150 that was built in the 70s and you get 10 miles to the gallon and you have to drive 60 miles each day to get to your job, you're paying probably 9 to 10 cents a mile in gas taxes. If you drive a Prius and you have that same distance, you're paying less than a penny a mile. So when you think about it, a mileage charge that might be, like I think our number for California was pegged at about 1.9 cents, it's a fair system. And the people that participated in the pilot realize that. We didn't have any privacy or data security issues or complications during our test. The last bullet really showed that folks loved having the smartphone app on their phone, because I called it a Fitbit for their car. They could loan their car out to their kid and they could say, hey, Junior, you were going a little too fast today, or you're hitting the brakes a little harder than you should. They would get that kind of data on their smartphone. That was cool stuff. The public loved it. Here's the things that we tested. The manual options, obviously the highest degree of privacy, a little bit more costly to administer. To the automated options, the plug-in devices, they were clearly the most popular, where you just plugged it into the under the dash port. We found the smartphone app. There was actually an app that used the GPS on the smartphone. It was a big battery suck and didn't work at all. But these are things that we tried and that we piloted. You've already heard mentioned the Ruck West, which is a very important thing. You can see I've got Oregon on the slide here along with California. You can see the history, how that's moving. We're now over on the far right side where the FAST Act signed into law by President Obama has given us money. California is now testing a pay-at-the-pump model, which I can get into. And these were some of the transition alternatives that we had to look at as we move forward. And I won't go into all the detail, but obviously, as you can see, a lot of thought has gone into what we're doing in California and wanting to partner with both Oregon and Washington. The top one on this slide shows really what we're looking at right now. I liken the pay-at-the-pump model is really something as simple as it is today. When somebody pulls up at the gas station and they put $20 on number 10, they don't realize they're paying the gas tax. They fill and they go. That's how simple a road charge is going to have to be if we ever think it's going to work. And one way to make it work like that is to put technology in the pump and put technology in the car, if they're so equipped. Instead of it saying $4 a gallon, when you pull up with an equipped car, it now drops down to, say, $3.25 a gallon, or whatever the real price is. You put 20 bucks on, and if you've driven 10 or 100 miles since you last got gas, and let's say it's 2 cents a gallon, it'll take 2 bucks off that $20. You've now paid to use the roads. The remaining $18, you fuel up, you go on your way. That's one way that we're looking at a pay-at-the-pump model as we move forward. And then in-vehicle telematics, keep in mind, folks, every car being built today and delivered today has a cellular-enabled modem built in with onboard telematics. The data and the equipment are in the cars. Now it's a matter of us working with the auto manufacturers, working with CARB here in California and others to try to take that data and be able to utilize it in a safe and private manner for the vehicle owners to be able to actually start going into the next steps. I mentioned this report that you have in front of you. As I also mentioned, these are some of the 2018 legislative recommendations that the CTC put out. Most importantly is to create a committee to develop specific policies that encourage the development and deployment of advanced technologies in California. Gets to really what I was just talking about, utilizing onboard telematics in vehicles to be able to move forward and get this next step going so we can actually have a good system on mileage reporting. You see this here, these articles. This was January of this year, where it talks about Oregon was the first, but there is a slow transition from gas tax to mileage fee, and that continues. Technology is going to impact this. Zero emission vehicles is going to drive this. And with EVs coming, it's all the more important that we figure out a way to be able to pay for our road system. And as we move towards, as we saw today at Gomentum Station, with automation, autonomous vehicles will have the technology also built into them. And one of the recommendations you'll see probably the CTC make, if my colleagues agree with me at some point, is any autonomous vehicle that is licensed to use the road in California will have to pay by the mile. These are the kind of transition things that we should start thinking about as we move forward into self-driving vehicles, whether it be by freight or by automobile. And with all these manufacturers out there working on this, there's obviously ways that we can, from a policy standpoint, make recommendations to the California legislature that we believe will be equitable and maintain a stable funding source for our transportation. Obviously, we all know this is the big thing in the news. No traffic accidents, no deaths. All you have to do is give up your right to drive. That may be a little wild, but that's kind of the transition that we're living in for the next 15 to 20 years. So obviously, I always tell people we are living in the future now as we move to see the promises and perils of automation and the various things that will come forward in self-driving cars like we saw today. We've already talked about Senate Bill 1. I won't get into that. But these are some of the important things that I usually like to cover because there's such an important piece of it. And as you heard, this is at risk right now. We'll see what the voters of California say in November. Obviously, the California Transportation Commission will continue to play an important role in these issues. We hope that the Senate Bill 1328 gets enacted that will allow us to continue our work in developing this through the TAC and it continuing. Caltrans continues to look at the exploration of other alternatives through the various research and demonstrations that I was mentioning. Federal funding is a huge help. Caltrans staff has been phenomenal in helping us in the feasibility of the pay at the pump or charge point demonstration. That's something that's very important for us right now. And of course, Caltrans staff continues to participate in the Ruck West activities, which has been very important. Last but not least, in our packets today is a joint letter that will be signed by the chairs of the three transportation commissions that are here today that will go to each member of Congress in California, Oregon, and Washington. The text of the letter's in our packets, and following the meeting today, the three chairs will sign it. We'll probably take a ceremonial picture. But the letter, what it does, as much as you heard Congressman DeSaulnier talk about earlier, it encourages members of Congress, and I think, frankly, Madam Chair, we should probably encourage this letter to go to every member of Congress throughout the entire country because they need to be able to see how important this transition is. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jim. So questions? Susan?
Commissioners, staff would just suggest that we make sure that all the commissioners around the table are good with that letter, before we ask the chairs to sign.
Do you want us to do some homework and sign them tomorrow, or what?
I believe that the staff has shared this letter with all the commissioners, so it would just be, I think it would be important to the commission and California staff at least, that we just ask all the commissioners around the table if they're good with the letter before we ask the chairs to sign. We notice this as an action.
Well, then if I can make a motion that the Tri-States Commission, I don't know if you have to do these separately as each commission. Do we have to do each one? All right, well then I will make a motion on behalf of the California Transportation Commission that we designate our chair to sign this letter.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Medaffer, a second by Commissioner Kehoe. Any discussion? I had just one question. We're going to send it to the entire congressional delegation for the U.S. It seems to me this is like preaching to the choir for these three states, are the states that are already the leaders, right?
If at your preference, we can send it to all Congress. Right now, we have the letter written for each of the delegates for each of the three states.
Okay, do you want to stay with these three states first and see if anybody reads it and calls us back? Yes.
Yeah, I might just suggest that in light of the congressman's suggestion that if we were going to send this to everyone in the state, we might want to reread it and think about the tone if it were to go to everyone in the country.
Okay, so
Why don't we suggest that for right now, since the original plan was to send a letter to California delegation, the Oregon delegation, and the Washington delegation, those members of Congress, that we also, as part of my motion, would give the chair of the California Commission the authority to make changes for California's purposes for the rest of the country, and I'm sure the other two commission chairs would agree with that as well. Then the letter could be tweaked to be more applicable to the other 47 states.
are you good with that second, Commissioner Kehoe?
Yes, I am.
Or with that a friendly amendment, Commissioner von Knonenberg?
I read things innocently. Would certain members of the congressional delegation from California read this in a way that they would interpret it to say that they would use it to come back against our efforts in November of not repealing that, saying, hey, they're going to put another hand in your pocket? I don't know. I wouldn't read it this way, but I just want to be smart about some things, Madam Chair.
I think that is a valid point because it could go either way on that.
If you're giving it
They
to
could
certain
read it,
members
yeah.
of the congressional delegation from this state that I know well, that I think you need to be I think we need to be smart about it.
Well, and this body does not get into campaigns, so we realize that. Yeah, Commissioner Gomez,
You
did you
could
have
do it
something?
the first Wednesday after November. I'm a little nervous about trying to send this out nationally. We represent our state of California. The other commissioners represent their state. I think it's very meaningful for us to communicate with our delegations. But this country is made up of a whole bunch of different people, and the West Coast is certainly different than other parts of our country. So I'd be very concerned about trying to send this out nationally at this time.
Okay, well, I think this motion is exclusively to the West Coast delegation, so point well taken. Commissioner Dunn, did you have your light on?
I did, but it wasn't on this letter. It was on the presentations from Mr. Medaffer, and
Okay.
with Eric, I wanted to ask questions on that.
Do those questions have anything to do with this
No,
vote?
it's different.
Okay, then we'll come back to you in just a second. So we have a motion and a second. Can I ask you, Jim, clarification in terms of the timing of when to send it?
I think Mr. Galmetti's letter, point is well taken. This letter should, for right now, just be to the California, Oregon, and Washington delegation. And if the motion as amended later is you as chair in consultation with the other two chairs, feel another version could go, then send it. But I get the idea that it's probably best not to.
I think we should come back and revisit that as a whole body when we're ready. But what about to Commissioner von Konynenberg's sensitivity to a ballot initiative?
I realize we, as a commission for California, don't get into the politics of this. I think the reality is simple. And in fact, I'm personally very concerned that the repeal of Senate Bill 1 will make this road charge program even more difficult. So I think the
So how
letter
about
should.
the
Jim-
first
so
Wednesday
Jim-
after in November?
Yeah, after the election, maybe?
Okay.
May I, Madam Chair?
Yes.
As Jim's second, I think Jim Gilmetti has a good point.
I think that was
And-
von
and also-
Konynenberg's,
And
yeah.
also Paul, so, because we have a very diverse delegation, lots of different ideas about how to fund public projects. After the election might be a more prudent way to communicate.
That's the revised motion.
Okay, so we have a motion and second with friendly amendments attached to them that say we will send this letter to the Western state delegations, right? Are we just sending it to our delegation, or all three of us, it's going to go together? All three, right?
Do we
Okay.
need separate
Yeah, you need
votes
separate,
per
each state.
commission?
Right,
So
right.
This would just be for
Right, this is just California's voting, and we're going to hold off on any expanded effort until more discussion is later. So, excuse me? The first Wednesday, okay, got it.
Just,
Yes, Commissioner Art.
well, I think a more fundamental reason to wait until November is that there will be new leadership, there will be new members of Congress, one way or the other. We don't know who they are right now. So the list we send out, if we were to send
That's
it out
true.
now, are going to be with people who are focused on something else right now and may not even look at the letter. If we wait till November, you got some new faces and an opportunity to start with an important issue with people who are planning to be there for a while.
Planning to go to work, okay, okay. So I think we're ready for a vote. All in favor? Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? Motion carries. Okay, Washington.
Thank you. Washington would entertain a motion to send this letter to our delegation, or the three-state delegation.
In November. Correct.
In November, right.
To that.
Mhm.
Okay. So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And any abstentions? No. Thank you.
So for Oregon, I think it might be important to note that the letter was drafted, so the three chairs have had an opportunity to review the letter in advance. And so do you have any questions about the letter as written? If not, I would welcome a motion.
I move that the Oregon Transportation Commission authorize Chair Boehne to sign the tri-state letter to the West Coast congressional members.
I second.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor? Oh, please.
Having worked with new legislators coming into Congress, I don't think it's a good idea to send this the day after the election. I think you need to wait a couple of weeks. These people have a lot of things ending up on their desk the first couple of weeks they're there. I think it might get lost in the turmoil.
I think that's a valid point. Right, for Oregon, it may not be quite as relevant, but I would look to my colleagues and wonder if the date or the timing of the letter has any
Just
particular. Please.
one more comment.
Sure, Commissioner
The
Kegel.
new members won't be sworn in until December, I think, right? So there is, we have the new ones coming in, and the ones that have not won re-election leaving. So there's a gap there of about, a week, or a month or so, 5 weeks. We could wait until the new year if you want to wait that long, Jim.
It's up to what, I think Mr. Arp makes a good point. The reality is the new members are the ones that we really want to be addressing this to, and I think Mr. Callery makes a good point as well, that they need some time to get up to speed. So,
twice, it's only 40
Yep.
cents each.
I was going to say, Bobby makes a suggestion, send it twice. It's only 40 cents a letter. May not be a bad idea. Sometimes you see things
think
twice,
it's a
at least
little
when I
more
was
than
in
that.
office. You get it twice, you start paying attention a little bit more.
Right, and I would lean toward the let's send it twice, but Commissioner Callery, go right ahead.
I agree with the twice, but I would revise the second letter.
Sure.
Update it. Tell them something new.
But I think availing ourselves, like, if we were to send this to more nationally, I would Thank you. I would offer ourselves for education and input, because it may be relatively foreign in terms of what we're working on, and for new colleagues, they may not quite understand the complexities. So I think a letter clearly outside of our three states would need to be crafted in a different message. So are we clear on when we would be sending the letter? We'd be sending a letter in November, or December, is that?
I would say December. December might be the right time for the first one. January would be the right time for the second one with some updates.
Okay, so Oregon is amending a little bit of what Washington and California just put forward.
Sorry about that.
So no, Commissioner, I think that's a good point. So without any objections, okay? Does that work for, okay, excellent. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you.
So technically, we probably should go back and redo ours to say, send it in a timely manner, or perhaps we could be
I don't think there was anything in our motion that
kept it.
dictated it went the day after.
The
or
day
anything
after.
like
We
that. I think
okay?
we're fine.
Yeah, and Commissioners, for the second letter, staff will bring that back to you at a commission meeting,
okay.
and then you can consider it at that time.
So all's good? Washington, you're good? We're good?
We're
Okay.
good.
Got some work done. Woo-hoo. There you go. Earned our keep today. So Commissioner Dunn, I think you had a question on this panel.
Thank you. A question for Jim and for Jim Medeffer, and then Eric, I'm really fascinated by your presentation. Jim, you touched on it a bit, but maybe it would be good to just share the repeal of SB 1 under Proposition 6 specifically mentions the road charge and vehicle miles traveled. What are the implications for all of our work here, should that be passed by the voters?
Well, I think it's probably for Oregon and Washington to understand where SB 1 was mentioned earlier, is that SB 1 is expected to raise about $5 billion annually to maintain and rehabilitate transportation infrastructure in California. And, repealing SB1, repealing SB1 not only gets rid of it, but it implements new requirements that the legislature no longer has the power, even with a 2/3 vote, to put in place any new taxes or fees, which, at least, and I'm not a lawyer sitting here, but I would say including a road charge, which could mean that it would be ultimately up to the people of the state of California to have to vote this in. Something that's not very popular out there are the two words gas tax. Too bad it wasn't called a transportation fee back in the day. Everybody gets the fair use concept, but the reality is the repeal of SB1 could imperil transportation funding in our state for decades forward.
Thank you. Yeah, my understanding is that we even have to send a VMT proposal back to the voters, the whole state, so.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And Erica, one of the things that intrigued me was your comments on the RUC as a funding option for local governments. One of the things California's taxing system is a spaghetti plate, right? It's just kind of crazy. But our local governments rely a great deal on sales tax measures to fund local operations. Our counties, many of them are self-help counties, have passed local sales tax measures in order to fund transportation. And yet, as we already know, those sales tax measures are declining, but it's also a lot to do with the changing dynamic of e-commerce versus brick and mortar. And in fact, we're doing a study right now on how it might affect land use, retail, local government funding. When you, in your presentation, said that this could be a funding option for local governments, I immediately think of, oh, this is interesting. Is there any support for this? Are you getting any political support for this as a concept within your state?
Interesting and great question. So just first for context, as a reminder, Oregon does not have sales tax. So y'all come up and shop anytime you want. But so it just means, our system of funding things is quite different. So to make a direct comparison might be a little more challenging. But we do have a local fuels tax. The local fuels tax, as I've been learning, isn't quite as sensical in how it's applied as one would assume. So it's not taxed at the point you put your fuel into your vehicle. It's taxed several distribution points back. And so it doesn't have a direct correlation to where you're driving and spending your time. But we do have many localities that have permission or whatever to be able to have a local fuels tax. So our concept in testing out this technology platform is that a recognition that as the utility of the fuels tax model, right, continues to decline given higher efficiency vehicles, that local governments too would want some sort of similar model that has it's a good proxy for use of the road. That's really what we're talking about when we talk about RUC, is we're talking about a proxy for use. And until 10, 20 years ago, gallon of fuel was a good proxy. I mean, we saw how it has been raising over time, but still, compared to other vehicles, it was a good proxy, and now it's not. And so your question is around, is there a political support or is there local support? And I'll just say we've been pretty quiet about it. We've been really doing this in terms of a technical test that then policymakers can have an option. Right now they don't have that option, right? So then they can have an option and do more work on user acceptance, on how people feel about it, on other options. But if we don't technically know that the GPS drift will correctly determine if you're on the right facility or not, then that's not even a tool they have in their toolbox. The Portland area, I think, is just naturally more inclined to think about it in that way and probably more accepting than perhaps some other parts of the state. But if you go to rural communities, you'll find that transportation funding is incredibly important in our rural communities because it's their access to everything, to healthcare, to education, to the economy. And so they, our advocates in transportation in our rural communities are very, very supportive and active in anything that can help sustain a sustainable transportation funding source. So we haven't tested this specifically with them because we want to know, does the tool work? But we're hoping that if it does, it provides a better, more fair proxy for use of the road at, say, congested times or congested facilities to be able to pay for the true impact that that causes.
Keep us in the loop on this one.
For sure.
This is a fascinating concept.
Yep, we're very excited about it.
Commissioner Gilmetti.
Erica, fuel tax and gas tax are the same or not in Oregon?
Yes, they have trained me to say fuels tax.
Okay, and are they paid at the pump?
Yes,
So,
by the user, yes.
so how does the new people in the ruck,
Uh-huh.
how do they compensate if they go to fill up their tank?
Right.
Do they get a credit? I mean, how does
Yeah.
that work?
Yeah, great question. So I'll just give you an example for me. So I have a vehicle that's like, I don't know, 26, 27 MPG. Maybe how I drive it, 21. But generally it's, longer trips, maybe 35, So what happens is I fill up my vehicle, I pay the normal gas tax, fuels tax that is charged to any other vehicle that's there. And then I get a statement at the end of the month, or at any time I can look on my smartphone and see on the app both my poor driving behavior as well as where I am currently with how much fuel I've used. And it will, right there in my bill, it says on this day, here's how many miles I drove, and it shows here's what your ruck charge was, and here is the fuel tax credit. And then I owe like 13 cents, But it does that math right there, and for most vehicles, it's based on your actual driving behavior because of how it's plugged into the vehicle. If that can't be used, then it's the EPA rating of your vehicle.
And this is really for all three states. Have any of you considered a ruck charge by weight of vehicle?
I'll let them answer first, and then I can answer.
In other words, obviously, if you have a small car, a Mini Cooper or whatever, obviously it's less wear and tear on the pavement versus having a Hummer or some large vehicle. I mean, are we separating that?
So Commissioner Gometti, that came up early on in the Technical Advisory Committee for the CTC, and it was determined that light passenger cars and trucks, typically 10,000 pounds or less, have a negligible impact on the road. There's 7 classes of vehicles, Class 7 being the most heaviest of vehicles. Once you get above Class 1, which is the light-duty cars and trucks, then you may start, and in fact, it wasn't in our legislation to make any recommendations as to cost. Under the new legislation by Bell, we'll have a little bit more authority to do those kinds of things, and the idea would be things that are heavier might in fact pay a higher per mile fee. But under the current 1077 legislation, we were not within our statutory abilities to make any such determinations.
And in Washington, we have talked about a number of levers or policy levers that could be pulled in a RUC program that we currently don't have with the gas tax, one being weight. There's also emissions, engine type, car type, that the policymakers would have the luxury of toggling or adjusting, whether it's for fairness and equity or impact or whatever you're trying to correlate that policy. You can harmonize the policy with the way you're taxing, which we can't do today with the gas tax. So it's definitely on our radar. We're not specifically testing it in the pilot, but I think recommendations will roll forward on those options for the legislature to consider in terms of those kinds of impacts. And if so, it would presumably replace our more standard flat weight fees and would shift to a different type of approach.
And in Oregon, similar to California, the impact is negligible for those light-duty vehicles, so they're all counted as the same. Oregon also has a weight mile tax for freight, so we are aware of and paying attention to weight on the heavier vehicles.
Okay, we're going to come down here.
Thanks. I had a question for the California road charge. With the legislative directive around looking into income equity, with the comments from Commissioner Simpson and the congressman about widening inequities in income. I'm wondering what you found in terms of the road charge's ability to kind of help steer that in the right direction. What were the findings around income equity that the legislative directive?
So
or
social
California?
justice is in fact a very important element of the California Technical Advisory Committee. And we took that into consideration, hearing a lot of issues, especially in the farm communities, agricultural communities, logging communities, where people had to travel long distances, or lower income folks wanting a break on the rate. Again, because our statutory authority did not allow us to get into rates, we took that as information, and I believe, and again, Director Branson can correct me, but I believe in the new legislation that Senator Bell has, we're going to be a lot less restricted in what we can look into, and I believe you'll start seeing a little bit more discussion on social equity that could ultimately be in recommendations from the CTC. But definitely an important issue. We heard it a lot, and it should not be ignored.
Commissioner Young?
So I have a question again for Erica. So in Oregon, you have a voluntary sign-up. So you told us which vehicles you saw most frequently. Do you have a sense of your voluntary sign-up demographics compared to the state demographics, both in regard with income and regional and those, and then both across racial and ethnic makeups?
Yeah, great question. I don't have that information with me. I'm sure we can get that. I do know that we have had participation from all corners and areas of our state. In fact, part of our objective earlier on has been to get some of those leaders who are detractors, right, to get signed up, and they kind of become supporters. Rural Oregonians pay more already for transportation than others. They drive farther, they have less fuel efficient vehicles. Low income people pay more already, they have older, less fuel efficient vehicles. And so just continuing to get as much of that participation as possible. I don't have with me specific demographic information, but if you'd like, I can certainly get back with you on that.
Okay, I think we're going to have to wrap this section up, but thank you to all our panelists. And we are going to move on to our final panel, but I'm going to ask all of my 3 state colleagues here to do me a favor. We need to stand up for just a second so we don't fall asleep before the next topic. So everybody wiggle a little bit. Don't go away. We are going to work. 3-minute break.
Yeah. The dinner, so our dinner at North Beach, we can all arrive at 6:30. I think that